The red warning lights flashed across the command center as Admiral Catherine Brooks stared at the holographic display. Each blinking dot represented a human colony under attack. Each fading signal meant thousands of people were dying. The alien fleet was moving faster than anyone had predicted. "Ma'am, we just lost contact with New Boston," reported Lieutenant Danny Walsh from his position at the communications console. His voice stayed steady, but Catherine could see the worry in his young face. "That makes 7 colonies in the past week." Catherine nodded slowly. The Vorthan Empire had declared war on the Galactic Federation 6 months ago. Since then, they had been cutting through Federation defenses like a hot knife through butter. The alien races that had ruled space for centuries were losing badly. Their advanced technology and centuries of experience meant nothing against the Vorthans' brutal efficiency. The door to the command center slid open with a soft hiss. Captain Jake Sullivan walked in, his uniform crisp despite having worked for 36 hours straight. Behind him came Dr. Peter Kane, the chief science officer, carrying a datapad that glowed with urgent information. "Admiral, we need to talk," Jake said. His voice carried the weight of command, even though he was 20 years younger than most of the alien fleet commanders. "The Federation Council is meeting in 2 hours. They want to know if Earth will commit the Leviathan to the war effort." Catherine looked out through the massive windows of the orbital station. Far below, Earth turned slowly in the darkness of space. Cities sparkled like diamonds across the night side of the planet. Somewhere out there, her own daughter was probably getting ready for school, completely unaware that the fate of human civilization hung in the balance. "What do you think, Jake?" she asked. "Is she ready?" The USS Leviathan hung in space dock like a sleeping giant. At 3 kilometers long, she was the largest warship humans had ever built. Her hull gleamed with a mixture of human steel and alien materials that the Federation had shared with Earth. Advanced weapon systems lined her sides, and her engines could push her through hyperspace faster than any ship in the galaxy. Jake looked at the massive vessel through the window. "She's more than ready, Admiral. The crew has been training nonstop for 6 months. Chief Engineer Lisa Martinez says all systems are running at peak efficiency. The weapons work perfectly, and the engines are better than anything the aliens have." Dr. Kane stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. "Admiral, I've been studying the battle reports from the front lines. The Vorthans have a pattern. They study their enemies, learn their tactics, and then counter them perfectly. Every alien race fights the same way their ancestors did for thousands of years. The Vorthans know exactly what to expect. But they don't know us," Catherine said, understanding immediately. "Exactly," Peter replied. "Humans have only been in space for 50 years. We don't have ancient battle traditions or rigid military doctrines. We adapt, we improvise, we change tactics in the middle of a fight. That's something the galaxy has never seen before." Catherine turned back to the display, showing the war's progress. The Federation was losing on every front. 3 major star systems had already fallen, and the Vorthan fleet was pushing toward the core worlds. If something didn't change soon, the war would be over in months. "There's something else," Jake said quietly. "Commander Beth Torres just got back from the Federation Council. She says most of the alien representatives think we're too young, too reckless to handle a mission this important. They're afraid we'll make things worse." Catherine almost smiled at that. "Too reckless? We're the species that figured out how to fly before we understood why planes stayed in the air. We went to the moon with computers less powerful than a calculator. Reckless is what we do best." The communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. Lieutenant Walsh quickly routed it to the main display. The face of Federation Admiral Kethran appeared, his blue-scaled features tight with worry. The alien commander looked tired, which was saying something for a species that could go weeks without sleep. "Admiral Brooks," Kethran said, his translator making his words sound formal and distant. "The situation has become critical. We have lost the Kepler defense grid. The Vorthens will reach the core systems within days. The Council needs an answer about Earth's commitment to the war effort." Catherine looked at Jake, then at Peter, then at the young lieutenant at the communications console. These were her people. Young, inexperienced by galactic standards, but burning with determination to prove themselves. The aliens saw humanity as children playing with toys they didn't understand. Maybe it was time to show them what children could accomplish when their backs were against the wall. "Tell the Council that Earth accepts the mission," she said firmly. "The Leviathan will deploy immediately." Catherine's expression showed surprise. "Admiral, are you certain? Your ship has been operational for only 6 months. The crew has no combat experience against an enemy of this caliber." "Admiral Kethron," Catherine replied, with respect. "Your experienced crews have been losing this war for 6 months. Maybe it's time to try something different." After the communication ended, Jake turned to her with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Admiral, we'll need to leave within 12 hours to reach the battle zone in time. The crew is ready. But are we really doing this?" Catherine walked to the window again, looking down at Earth. Somewhere down there, children were playing in parks, families were having dinner, and people were living their lives without fear. The Vorthens would take all of that away if they won this war. The aliens might think humans were too young and reckless, but sometimes young and reckless was exactly what the situation required. "Yes, Captain, we're doing this," she said. "Get your crew ready. Commander Torres will brief you on the tactical situation during the flight. And Jake?" "Yes, ma'am?" "Don't try to fight like the aliens do. Fight like humans. Be unpredictable. Be creative. And don't follow the rules if the rules don't make sense." Jake grinned, the first genuine smile she had seen from him in weeks. "That's what we do best, Admiral." As Jake and Peter left to prepare the ship, Catherine remained at the window. Lieutenant Walsh continued monitoring communications, the steady flow of bad news creating a constant background noise in the command center. Each lost battle, each fallen colony, each desperate call for help reminded her of what was at stake. The Leviathan began powering up her systems. Catherine could see the lights coming on section by section as 1,500 human crew members took their positions. Engineers ran final checks on systems that combined human innovation with alien technology. Pilots climbed into fighters that were faster and more maneuverable than anything the galaxy had seen. Scientists prepared equipment that might give them the edge they needed to survive. In 6 hours, the ship would leave Earth's protection and jump into hyperspace. In 3 days, she would reach a battlefield where the fate of the galaxy would be decided. The aliens thought the war was already lost. They thought humanity was too young and inexperienced to make a difference. Catherine watched her flagship prepare for war and felt something the galaxy hadn't experienced in months: hope. The Vorthens had studied every alien race in the Federation. They knew their tactics, their weaknesses, their predictable patterns of behavior. But they had never fought humans before. They were about to learn that the most dangerous opponent wasn't the one with the most experience or the best technology. It was the one who refused to accept that victory was impossible, who would try anything, risk everything, and fight until the very end. The war was about to change, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Leviathan dropped out of hyperspace into chaos. Captain Jake Sullivan gripped his command chair as the massive ship shuddered from the transition. Around them, the Kepler defense grid was under full assault. Federation ships burned like dying stars while Vorthen warships moved through the battlefield with deadly precision. "Report," Jake ordered, his voice cutting through the noise of battle stations. "Sir, we're detecting 47 Vorthen vessels," called out Lieutenant Amy Foster from the navigation station. Her fingers danced across the controls as she processed the flood of tactical data. They've got the Federation fleet pinned between two asteroid fields. It's a massacre out there. Through the main view screen, Jake could see the terrible efficiency of the Vorthan attack. Their ships moved in perfect formations, each vessel knowing exactly where the others would be. They had turned warfare into a science, and the Federation forces were being dissected like specimens in a laboratory. "Communications, get me Admiral Kethron," Jake said. "And someone tell me where we can do the most good." The face of the Federation. Commander appeared on screen. Behind him, Jake could see smoke and sparks as his ship took another hit. The alien's blue scales were darkened with what looked like blood. "Captain Sullivan, thank the stars you're here," Kethron said. "We've lost 8 ships in the past hour. The Vorthans have us trapped in a crossfire pattern. Every time we try to break out, they predict our movements and cut us down." "What's their pattern?" Jake asked, studying the tactical display. The Vorthan ships moved like clockwork, each maneuver calculated to maximum efficiency. "They study our formations, learn our standard responses, then counter them perfectly," Kethran replied. "We try to flank left. They're already waiting. We attempt a frontal assault. They've positioned their heaviest ships to absorb it. It's like they can read our minds." Jake looked at the battlefield with fresh eyes. The Federation ships were following. Textbook tactics that had worked for thousands of years. Tight formations, coordinated movements, predictable attack patterns. The Vorthans had clearly studied these tactics and developed perfect counters for each one. "Lieutenant Commander Rick Carter," Jake called to his fighter squadron leader. Rick turned from his station, his young face eager for action. "Yes, sir?" "Launch. All fighters, but don't follow Federation attack protocols. I want you to make it up as you go along." Rick grinned. "Sir, that goes against every training manual we have." "Good. The Vorthans have read those manuals, too. Show them something they've never seen before." As Rick headed for the fighter bays, Jake turned to his weapons officer. "Dan Price, are our main guns ready?" "All weapon systems are online and charged." "Captain," Dan replied. "But sir, if we engage from here, we'll be outnumbered 20-1. "Then we won't engage from here," Jake said. He looked at Amy Foster. "Navigator, I need you to plot a jump that puts us right between those two Vorthan dreadnoughts." Amy's face went pale. "Sir, that position is suicide. We'd be taking fire from both ships at point-blank range." "Exactly what they won't expect," Jake replied. "Can you do it?" Amy stared at her console, running calculations that made the computer protest with warning beeps. "The jump coordinates are mathematically possible, but the computer says there's a 90% chance we'll be destroyed before we can return fire." "The computer hasn't fought Vorthans before," Jake said. "Make the jump." The Leviathan vanished from its position and reappeared directly between the two largest enemy ships. For a moment, everyone on both sides froze in surprise. Then chaos erupted. "Fire everything," Jake ordered. The Leviathan's weapons opened up at point-blank range on both targets. Her main guns, designed to punch through the heaviest armor, tore massive holes in the Vorthan ships. At the same time, both enemy vessels turned their weapons on the human ship. "Shields down to 60%, reported Chief Engineer Lisa Martinez from her station. "But sir, their crossfire is hitting each other as much as us." Jake smiled grimly. The Vorthan ships had positioned themselves for maximum firepower, but they hadn't expected an enemy to appear between them. Now their own weapons were damaging each other, while the Leviathan sat in the eye of the storm. Meanwhile, Rick Carter led his fighter squadron into battle like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of flying in tight formations, the human pilots spread out and attacked from every direction at once. They broke off attacks in the middle to hit different targets, regrouped in impossible locations, and generally ignored every rule of space combat. "What are they doing?" demanded War Commander Zethkar from his flagship. The Vorthan leader had studied every known fighter tactic, but the humans were flying like madmen. "Sir, they appear to be improvising," his tactical officer replied. "Uncertainly. Each pilot is making individual decisions without coordinating with the others." "That's impossible," Zethkar snapped. "No military force can function without coordination and discipline." But the human fighters were not only functioning, they were winning. Vorthan pilots, trained to counter specific attack patterns, found themselves facing opponents who changed tactics every few seconds. Just when they thought they understood what a human pilot would do next, that pilot would do something completely different. Back on the Leviathan, Dr. Peter Kane was analyzing the battle from his science station. "Captain, I'm detecting something." "Interesting. The Vorthan ships are having trouble targeting our fighters. Their computers keep trying to predict flight paths, but our pilots aren't following any predictable patterns." "That's the idea," Jake replied as he watched another Vorthan cruiser explode under the combined fire of 3 human fighters attacking from impossible angles. "They've built their entire military around the assumption that enemies will behave logically and predictably. We're showing them what happens when the enemy refuses to be logical." The tide of battle began to turn. Federation ships, inspired by the human attack, began breaking their own formations and trying new tactics. It wasn't as chaotic as the human approach, but it was different enough to confuse the Vorthan targeting systems. "Captain," Amy Foster called out, "the Vorthans are trying to retreat. Should we pursue?" Jake looked at the tactical display. The enemy fleet was indeed pulling back, but they were doing it in perfect order, covering each other's retreat with practiced efficiency. Even in defeat, they were following doctrine. "Negative," Jake decided. "Let them go. They need to report back to their commanders about what happened here." "Sir?" Dan Price looked confused. "We could probably destroy half their fleet if we pressed the attack." "We could," Jake agreed. "But then they'd just send a bigger fleet next time. This way, they'll go back and tell their people that humans don't fight like anyone else in the galaxy. They'll waste time trying to figure out our tactics, develop counters for attacks that we'll never use again." As the Vorthan fleet jumped to hyperspace, the battlefield fell silent, except for the rescue operations beginning among the damaged Federation ships. Admiral Kethron's face appeared on the screen again, this time showing amazement instead of desperation. "Captain Sullivan, in all my years of military service, I have never seen anything like that engagement. Your tactics were completely illogical." "Thank you, Admiral," Jake replied with a straight face. "That wasn't meant as a compliment," Kethron said, then paused, although perhaps it should be. "You saved the defense grid and most of my fleet. How did you know those maneuvers would work?" Jake looked around his bridge at his young crew. Lieutenant Commander Carter was back from his fighter, grinning widely. Amy Foster was already plotting their next jump. Dan Price was checking weapon systems and reporting full readiness. Dr. Kane was analyzing battle data with the excitement of a scientist who had just discovered something new. "We didn't know they would work," Jake admitted, "but we knew the old ways weren't working. Sometimes you have to try something different, even if it seems impossible." As the Leviathan prepared to leave the battlefield, Jake realized that everything had changed. The galaxy had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare, creating rules and doctrines that governed how battles should be fought. Today, humanity had thrown out those rules and won anyway. The Vorthans would study what happened at Kepler. They would try to understand human tactics and develop counters. But Jake suspected they would fail, because humans didn't really have tactics in the traditional sense. They had something much more dangerous, the willingness to try anything if it might work. The war had just begun, but already nothing would ever be the same. War Commander Zethkar stared at the tactical reports from the Kepler battle, his 4 eyes scanning the data again and again. In 300 years of military service, he had never seen anything like it. The humans had violated every principle of space warfare, and somehow won. "Explain this to me again," he demanded of his chief tactical officer. "How does a single ship appear between 2 of our dreadnoughts without being destroyed?" "Sir, they used hyperspace coordinates that our computers calculated as impossible," the officer replied nervously. "The jump should have torn their ship apart. Instead, they materialized at point-blank range and used our own crossfire against us." Zethkar's claws clicked against his command throne. "And their fighters? Complete chaos, sir. No formations, no coordinated attacks, no predictable patterns. Each pilot seemed to be making decisions independently, without any central command structure." "Impossible," Zethkar growled. "Military forces require discipline and coordination. They must have been following some pattern we haven't identified yet." But even as he said it, Zethkar knew something fundamental had changed. The Vorthan Empire had conquered half the galaxy by studying their enemies, learning their tactics, and developing perfect counters. Now they faced an enemy that seemed to have no tactics at all. Meanwhile, aboard the Leviathan, Captain Jake Sullivan was dealing with the consequences of their victory. The Federation Council had summoned him to explain his methods, and not all the alien commanders were pleased with his approach. "Captain." "Sullivan," said Admiral Vextar, a tall insectoid being whose species had been fighting wars for 5,000 years. "Your report describes tactics that are fundamentally unsound. You deliberately placed your ship in a position where it should have been destroyed." Jake stood before the holographic projections of a dozen alien commanders, each representing a different member species of the Federation. Some looked curious, others appeared concerned, and a few seemed openly hostile to the human approach to warfare. "With respect, Admiral Vextar, our ship wasn't destroyed. We completed the mission and saved the Kepler defense grid." "By luck," snapped another commander. "What you did was reckless gambling, not military strategy." Dr. Peter Kane stepped forward from his position behind Jake. "If I may, sirs, our analysis suggests it was more than luck. Humans appear to process tactical information differently than other species. We see patterns and possibilities that traditional analysis might miss." "Explain," said Admiral Kethron, who was attending the meeting despite his injuries from the battle. Peter activated a holographic display showing brain scans. Human neural. Patterns show unusual activity in areas associated with creative thinking and pattern recognition. When faced with a complex tactical situation, we don't just calculate the optimal solution. We imagine multiple solutions simultaneously and choose the one that feels right. Feels right? Admiral Vextar's translator made his disbelief clear. Military decisions should be based on logic and calculation, not feelings. "Perhaps," Jake replied, "but feelings have kept humans alive for millions of years of evolution. Sometimes intuition sees what pure logic misses." Before the debate could continue, urgent alarms began sounding throughout the Federation command ship. A communications officer rushed to Admiral Kethron with a priority message. "Sir, we're receiving a distress call from the Proxima sector. 3 Federation battle groups are trapped by a Vorthan fleet. They've been under siege for 3 weeks and are running out of supplies." The holographic display changed to show the tactical situation at Proxima. Federation ships were clustered around a damaged space station, surrounded by Vorthan vessels in a perfect blockade formation. Any attempt to break out would result in the destruction of the trapped fleet. "The situation is hopeless," Admiral Vextar said grimly. "We cannot break through that blockade without losing more ships than we can afford." Jake studied the display with fresh eyes. The Vorthans had positioned their ships in a textbook siege formation, covering all possible escape routes. According to every military manual ever written, the trapped Federation forces were doomed. "Give me command of the rescue mission," Jake said quietly. "Absolutely not," Admiral Vextar replied immediately. "This situation requires careful planning and experienced leadership, not reckless human experimentation." "Admiral," Jake said, turning to face the insectoid commander directly, "how many ships has careful planning and experienced leadership saved in this war? How many battles have you won using traditional tactics?" The uncomfortable silence that followed answered his question. Admiral Kethrin spoke up from his medical bed. "The human has a point. Our experienced methods have been failing against the Vorthans for months. Perhaps we should try something different." "I need complete tactical authority," Jake continued. "No interference, no suggestions, no second guessing. You've seen what happens when humans are allowed to fight their own way." After heated debate, the Federation Council agreed. Within hours, the Leviathan was leading a small rescue fleet toward the Proxima sector. Jake had chosen his ships carefully, selecting captains who were willing to follow unconventional orders without question. As they approached the battlefield, Jake called a meeting of all ship commanders. The holographic conference room filled with aliens who looked nervous about what the human might ask them to do. "Here's the situation," Jake began, displaying the Vorthan blockade. "They have us outnumbered 3-1, and they're expecting us to try a frontal assault or a flanking maneuver. We're going to do neither. What do you propose?" asked Captain Telver of the Centauri cruiser. "We're going to split up," Jake said. "Each ship will approach from a different vector at different times, using different methods. No coordination, no formation flying, no predictable patterns." The alien captains looked at each other in alarm. "Captain Sullivan," said Commander Rothak, "that's not how fleet combat works. Ships need to support each other, coordinate their attacks, maintain communication." "Why?" Jake asked simply. Because that's how it's always been done," Rothak replied uncertainly. "The Vorthans know how it's always been done," Jake pointed out. "They've studied every fleet formation ever used. They know exactly how to counter coordinated attacks. But they've never faced a fleet where every ship is acting independently." Communications Officer Sam Jackson spoke up from his station. "Captain, I've been monitoring Vorthan communications. Their command structure is extremely rigid. Every decision has to be approved by higher authority before they can act." "Perfect," Jake smiled. "That means they can't adapt quickly to changing situations. If we hit them from multiple directions with completely different tactics, they won't be able to coordinate a response fast enough." The rescue mission began with what looked like complete chaos. Ships approached the blockade from every direction, some moving fast, others slow, some attacking immediately, while others waited. The Leviathan itself took the most direct route, charging straight toward the center of the Vorthan formation. "Sir," Annie Foster called out, "the enemy fleet is having trouble deciding which ships to engage first. Their formations are breaking up as they try to respond to multiple threats." "Weapons Officer Price, target their command ship," Jake ordered. "Chief Martinez, I need maximum power to engines and shields." The Leviathan smashed through the Vorthan line like a battering ram, her guns blazing at every target in range. Behind her, the other rescue ships attacked from their assigned vectors, each using completely different tactics. The Vorthan commanders found themselves facing an impossible situation. Every time they moved ships to counter one threat, another attack would come from an unexpected direction. Their rigid command structure, perfect for coordinated warfare, became a liability when facing an enemy that refused to coordinate. Within 2 hours, the blockade was broken. The trapped Federation ships were free, and the Vorthan fleet was in full retreat. As the rescued vessels formed up for the journey home, their captains sent messages of amazement and gratitude. "How? Did you know that would work?" asked Admiral Kethron during the post-battle debrief. Jake thought about the question seriously. I didn't know it would work, but I knew the traditional approach wasn't working. Sometimes you have to trust that trying something new is better than failing with something old. Dr. Kane had been analyzing the battle data. Captain, the Vorthans sent a priority message to their high command immediately after the engagement. They're requesting new tactical protocols to counter what they're calling chaos warfare. Good, Jake replied. Let them waste time trying to develop counters for tactics we'll never use again. While they're studying this battle, we'll be inventing completely new ways to fight. As the rescue fleet jumped to hyperspace, Jake realized that the galaxy was beginning to understand something important. Humans didn't win battles through superior firepower or advanced technology. They won by refusing to accept that any situation was hopeless, by finding solutions where none should exist, and by turning their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. The war was far from over, but the balance was shifting. The galaxy was learning to fight like humans, and nothing would ever be the same. The success at Proxima changed everything. Within weeks, Federation commanders across the galaxy were trying to copy human tactics. Ships that had followed the same battle formations for centuries suddenly began experimenting with new approaches. Some succeeded brilliantly, others failed spectacularly, but all of them were learning to think differently about warfare. War Commander Zethkar watched these developments with growing frustration. His intelligence officers brought him daily reports of Federation forces using unpredictable tactics, breaking formations, and winning battles they should have lost. The humans were spreading their chaotic approach like a virus through the enemy fleet. Sir, his tactical officer reported during their morning briefing, the Federation has reorganized their entire command structure. They're giving individual ship captains much more authority to make independent decisions. Impossible, Zethkar snapped. Military forces require central command and coordination. Without proper hierarchy, they'll destroy themselves through friendly fire and confusion. But the reports suggested otherwise. Federation ships were becoming more dangerous, not less, as they adopted human-style tactics. The Vorthan Empire's carefully planned strategies were failing against an enemy that seemed to change its approach with every battle. We need to stop this at its source, Zethkar decided. If we can destroy their flagship and its captain, we can cut the head off this serpent. Prepare a trap for the human vessel. Meanwhile, aboard the Leviathan, Captain Jake Sullivan was dealing with his own problems. Admiral Catherine Brooks had sent him a message marked with the highest priority encryption. The news it contained was both encouraging and terrifying. Jake, her recorded image said, "Congratulations on your victories. The entire Federation is talking about human tactical innovations, but we've intercepted Vorthan communications. They're planning something big, specifically targeting you and the Leviathan. Be careful out there." Dr. Peter Kane looked up from his analysis station. "Captain, I've been studying the pattern of recent Vorthan movements. They're positioning ships in what looks like routine convoy escorts, but the formations are too precise. It feels like bait." "Bait for what?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "For us," Peter replied grimly. "They've learned that we respond to situations where Federation forces are in danger. If they create the right kind of emergency, they can predict where we'll go and when we'll arrive." Jake studied the tactical displays showing recent Vorthan fleet movements. Peter was right. The enemy was becoming smarter about how to fight humans. Instead of trying to copy human unpredictability, they were trying to exploit human psychology. "Sir," Communications Officer Sam Jackson called out, "we're receiving a distress signal from the merchant convoy at Centauri Junction. They're under attack by 12 Vorthan raiders." Jake looked at the message details. A civilian convoy carrying Medical supplies to refugee camps was being systematically destroyed by enemy ships. The attack pattern was too aggressive for simple raiders, and the location was too convenient. Everything about the situation screamed, "Trap." "It's obviously bait," said Lieutenant Commander Rick Carter from his fighter squadron station. "They want us to come running to the rescue so they can ambush us." "You're right," Jake agreed, "but we're going anyway." The bridge crew turned to stare at him. Amy Foster was the first to speak. "Sir, if we know it's a trap, why are we walking into it?" "Because those are real civilian ships being destroyed by real Vorthan raiders," Jake replied. "The trap might be fake, but the people dying are real. We can't let innocent civilians die just because saving them is dangerous." Chief Engineer Lisa Martinez spoke up from her station. "Captain, even if we go, how do we survive an ambush when we know it's coming?" Jake smiled grimly. "By turning their trap against them. Sam, send a message to Admiral Brooks. Tell her we need backup at Centauri Junction, but we're going in first. Amy, plot a course that gets us there in 6 hours." 6 hours? Amy looked confused. "Sir, we could make that jump in 2 hours if we push the engines." "Exactly. They're expecting us to arrive as quickly as possible to save the convoy. Instead, we're going to arrive when they least expect us, after they think their trap has failed." The Leviathan jumped to hyperspace, but instead of heading directly to Centauri Junction, Amy plotted a longer route that would bring them to the battlefield hours later than expected. As they traveled, Jake explained his plan to the senior staff. "The Vorthans have studied us enough to know we'll respond to civilian distress calls," he said. "They're counting on our predictable human need to help people in danger. But they're also counting on us arriving at a specific time so their ambush ships can be in position. So we throw off their timing," Dr. Kane said, understanding immediately. "Right. By the time we arrive, their ambush fleet will have been waiting in position for hours. They'll be tired, bored, and starting to wonder if their intelligence was wrong. Some of their commanders might even be considering calling off the operation." When the Leviathan finally dropped out of hyperspace at Centauri Junction, they found exactly what Jake had predicted. The merchant convoy was gone, destroyed hours. Earlier, the 12 Vorthan battleships were still waiting in ambush positions around the system. Worse for the enemy, their perfect formation had started to drift as individual ship commanders grew restless during the long wait. "Sir," Ben Price reported from the weapons station, "I count 12 enemy vessels, just like the intelligence report said. But they're not in optimal attack positions anymore." "Good," Jake replied. "Target the command ship first. Lisa, give me everything the engines have. We're going to hit them before they can reorganize." The Leviathan charged into the center of the enemy formation like an arrow shot from a bow. Her weapons opened fire on the Vorthan flagship, while her engines pushed her through the heart of their scattered fleet. The enemy ships, caught off guard by the late arrival and aggressive attack, struggled to respond. "Sir," Rick Carter called. "Out. Their fighter squadrons are launching, but they're having trouble forming up. It looks like they weren't expecting us to attack so aggressively." "Launch all fighters," Jake ordered. "But don't engage their squadrons directly. Go after their capital ships while they're distracted trying to coordinate a response." The battle became a masterclass in turning an enemy's expectations against them. The Vorthans had prepared a perfect ambush with overlapping fields of fire and coordinated attack patterns. But they had prepared it for an enemy that would arrive panicked and desperate to save civilian lives. Instead, they faced an enemy that arrived calm, prepared, and ready to turn their own trap into a killing ground. "Captain," Amy Foster called out, "enemy reinforcements are jumping in. Looks like Admiral Brooks got your message." Federation ships began appearing throughout the system, attacking the Vorthan ambush fleet from every direction. But these weren't the rigid formations and predictable tactics the enemy expected. Each Federation ship was operating independently, using human-inspired tactics that kept the Vorthans guessing. War Commander Zethkar, commanding the ambush from his flagship, watched his perfect trap fall apart with growing horror. The humans had somehow turned his greatest strength into his greatest weakness. His disciplined, coordinated fleet was being torn apart by enemies who refused to fight by any recognizable rules. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "our ships are requesting permission to break formation and engage independently." "Denied," Zethkar snapped. "Maintain formation and execute Standard Tactical Response 7. But Standard Tactical Response 7 was designed to counter Standard Tactical Approach 3. The humans weren't using standard anything. They were improvising, adapting, and changing their tactics faster than the Vorthan command structure could respond. Within 3 hours, the ambush fleet was destroyed or scattered. As the last enemy ships jumped to hyperspace, Jake surveyed the battlefield with mixed emotions. They had won another victory, but the cost was always the same. Real people had died while the Vorthans set their trap. "Captain," Dr. Kane said quietly, "I've been analyzing the enemy communications we intercepted during the battle. The Vorthans are starting to understand something about human psychology. They're learning to use our own compassion against us." Jake nodded grimly. The enemy was adapting, just as humans did. But they were adapting in a different way, trying to exploit human weaknesses rather than copying human strengths. "That's going to make things more difficult," he admitted. "But it also means they're starting to fear us enough to change their own tactics. When your enemy starts adapting to fight you, it means you're winning." As the Leviathan prepared to leave the battlefield, Jake realized that the war had entered a new phase. The Vorthans were no longer simply trying to counter human tactics. They were trying to understand human nature itself, to find ways to use humanity's greatest virtues against them. But Jake suspected they would fail at that too, because the thing about humans was that they always found a way to turn their weaknesses into strengths, their compassion into courage, and their unpredictability into victory. The galaxy was learning that nothing mattered more than refusing to give up, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. The final battle began with the largest fleet assembly in galactic history. 300 Vorthan warships surrounded their homeworld like a deadly constellation, each vessel positioned with mathematical precision. War Commander Zethkar had gathered every ship, every weapon, every soldier the Empire could spare for this last desperate defense. Admiral Catherine Brooks stood on the bridge of the Federation command ship, watching the tactical display with grim determination. Beside her, representatives from dozens of alien species studied the Vorthan formations with expressions ranging from awe to terror. "The orbital defenses alone could stop a traditional assault," said Admiral Kethron, his wounds from earlier battles finally healed. "Adding 300 capital ships makes this fortress nearly impossible to breach." Catherine nodded, but her attention was focused on a single dot moving toward the enemy fleet. The USS Leviathan, with Captain Jake Sullivan commanding, led the advance guard of what appeared to be a hopeless attack. Behind them came ships from across the galaxy, all learning to fight like humans. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "Captain Sullivan is requesting permission to begin the assault." "Granted," Catherine replied, "and send him a message. Tell him that Earth believes in him." Aboard the Leviathan, Jake received the message as his ship approached the outer edge of the Vorthan defense perimeter. Around him, his crew prepared for what might be their final battle. They had come so far from that first engagement at Kepler, had learned so much about themselves and their enemies. "Sir," Navigator Amy Foster called out, "I've calculated 17 different approach vectors that could give us simultaneous strikes on their defensive positions. The timing will have to be perfect, but it's possible." Jake smiled at the word simultaneous. Months ago, Amy would have calculated a single optimal approach and recommended a coordinated assault. Now she was thinking like a human, seeing possibilities where others saw only problems. "Do it," he ordered. "All ships execute individual attack patterns. No formations, no coordination, no predictable movements. Make them fight 17 different battles at the same time." The Federation fleet scattered like seeds in the wind. Each ship approached Vorthen Prime from a different angle, at different speeds, using completely different tactics. Some came in fast and aggressive, others slow and careful. Some attacked immediately, others waited for the perfect moment. War Commander. Zethkar watched the approaching chaos with growing confusion. In all his studies of warfare, he had never seen anything like this. The enemy fleet wasn't following any pattern he could recognize, wasn't using any formation he could counter. "Sir," his tactical officer reported nervously, "we're detecting attack vectors from 17 different directions. Our defensive systems are designed to repel coordinated assaults, not whatever this is. It's madness," Zethkar growled. "Military forces cannot function without coordination and discipline." But the human forces were functioning, and functioning better than anyone had expected. Ships that should have been destroyed were surviving impossible odds through pure adaptability. Captains who had never worked together were somehow supporting each other through intuition and improvisation. The Leviathan led the charge directly toward the planet's North Pole, her guns blazing at every target in range. But this wasn't the same desperate attack Jake had used at Kepler. This was controlled chaos, calculated madness, a perfect storm of human ingenuity applied to the art of war. "Lisa, I need more power to the forward shields," Jake called to his chief engineer. "Dan, target their command center. If we can disrupt their coordination, the whole defense network will start to break down." Chief Engineer Lisa Martinez rerouted. Power from systems they didn't immediately need, pushing the ship's capabilities beyond design limits. Weapons Officer Dan Price fired the main guns with precision that would have impressed an alien computer, but with the creativity that only humans possessed. All around them, the battle raged with unprecedented intensity. Human fighters danced between enemy ships like birds in a storm, attacking weak points that no tactical computer would have identified. Federation vessels commanded by alien captains who had learned to think like humans turned impossible maneuvers into stunning victories. Dr. Peter Kane analyzed the battle from his science station, watching patterns emerge from what looked like complete chaos. "Captain, the Vorthen command structure is starting to collapse. They can't coordinate responses to this many independent attacks." Jake nodded, watching as enemy ships began making individual decisions instead of waiting for orders from their commanders. The rigid hierarchy that had made the Vorthen Empire so efficient was becoming a liability when faced with enemies who refused to be predictable. "Amy, take us right through the center of their formation," Jake ordered. "Maximum speed, all weapons firing." "Sir, that's suicide," Amy replied automatically, then caught herself. "I mean, the computers say it's suicide. But the computers haven't been right about much lately." "Then ignore the computers," Jake said with a grin. "Trust your instincts." The Leviathan plunged through the heart of the enemy fleet like a comet, her weapons tearing holes in ships that should have been able to destroy her easily. But the Vorthen vessels were trying to coordinate their fire, waiting for orders that would never come fast enough to target an enemy moving so unpredictably. Meanwhile, on the planet below, Vorthen civilians watched the battle in their skies with growing amazement. For the first time in their species' history, their perfect military machine was being defeated by opponents who seemed to fight without any system at all. "Sir," the Vorthen communications officer called out desperately, "our orbital platforms are requesting permission to engage independently." The coordinated defense pattern is failing. War Commander Zethkar stared at the tactical display, watching his carefully planned defense crumble under the assault of an enemy that shouldn't exist. Every principle of warfare he had learned, every strategy his people had perfected, was useless against opponents who treated military doctrine as merely a suggestion. "Permission granted," he said finally. "All ships engage at will." But it was too late. The moment Zethkar abandoned coordination, his forces became just another collection of individual ships fighting individual battles. And in individual combat, human creativity and adaptability gave them an overwhelming advantage. The battle lasted 18 hours, but the outcome became clear much sooner. One by one, Vorthan ships began to surrender. Their crews, trained to follow orders and trust in their commanders, found themselves unable to cope with an enemy that changed tactics every few minutes. When War Commander Zethkar finally appeared on the Leviathan's main screen to offer surrender, he looked like a being whose entire worldview had been shattered. "Captain Sullivan," he said through his translator, "I do not understand how you have defeated us. Your tactics are impossible. Your strategies make no sense. You fight like madmen, yet you win like gods." Jake studied the alien commander with something approaching sympathy. "We fight like humans, War Commander. We refuse to accept that any challenge is impossible. We adapt, we improvise, we find solutions where none should exist." "But how?" Zethkar asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "How do you coordinate without coordination? How do you succeed without following proven strategies?" "We trust each other," Jake replied simply. "We trust that every human will do their best, will find a way to succeed, will never give up no matter how impossible things seem. That's not a military tactic, War Commander. That's who we are." As the Vorthan fleet formally surrendered, Admiral Catherine Brooks addressed the galaxy from the bridge of her command ship. Representatives from hundreds of worlds listened as she announced not just victory, but a fundamental change in how the galaxy would approach challenges in the future. "Today we learned that the most powerful weapon isn't superior technology or overwhelming force," she said. "It's the refusal to accept defeat. It's the willingness to try something new when the old ways aren't working. It's the courage to trust in each other and in our ability to find solutions." Dr. Peter Kane, analyzing the battle data, made an observation that would be remembered for generations. "The Vorthans studied warfare as a science," he reported. "They tried to perfect it through logic and calculation. But humans approach warfare as an art. We create new possibilities instead of following old patterns." In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Federation reorganized itself around principles that combined alien technology and knowledge with human adaptability and creativity. The rigid hierarchies that had governed galactic civilization for millennia gave way to flexible structures that encouraged innovation and individual initiative. Captain Jake Sullivan found himself promoted to admiral, not because he had won battles, but because he had shown the galaxy a new way to face impossible challenges. The Leviathan became a symbol of humanity's contribution to galactic civilization, the proof that sometimes the youngest, most inexperienced member of a group could teach everyone else something vital. Years later, when historians studied the war, they would identify the moment when everything changed. It wasn't when the first shots were fired, or when the biggest battle was fought, or when the final surrender was accepted.